Chapter 1. A Mysterious Death. The rain fell heavily on the dark streets of the city, drawing confusing patterns on the dirty windows of parked cars. The streetlights flickered, casting unsettling shadows over the narrow alley. Jack Malone, a middle-aged detective with a scruffy beard and eyes that had seen too much, pulled up the collar of his coat, trying to shield himself from the biting cold of the night. Jack approached the crime scene, illuminated only by the flashes of police photographers' cameras. A group of onlookers, held back by yellow tape, murmured in shock. At the center of the commotion, lying on the rain-soaked asphalt, was a young woman. She seemed to be at peace, as if merely asleep. There were no signs of struggle, no visible wounds. Just cold, inexplicable death. "Detective Malone, glad you're here," said the patrol officer who had called him, a nervous rookie holding a trembling flashlight. "It's a strange case, sir. No sign of assault. Just dead." Jack nodded, crouching down to examine the body more closely. The young woman had long brown hair, now wet and stuck to her pale face. She wore an elegant dress, something that clashed completely with the filthy alley. "ID?" Jack asked without taking his eyes off the scene. "We found nothing, sir. No purse, no wallet. Just this." The officer pointed to a small white flower beside the body. Jack picked up the flower carefully, examining it under the dim light. It was a jasmine, a beautiful and fragrant flower, a stark contrast to the silent death beside him. "A death so clean," Jack murmured to himself. "There's nothing clean about these streets." Malone was a veteran, a detective with 2 decades of experience behind him. His life was a collection of personal failures and professional successes, each solved case an attempt to atone for his own demons. He had seen it all: betrayals, vendettas, crimes of passion. But something about this scene felt out of the ordinary. "Officer, check the missing person's records. Maybe we can find out who she is," Jack said, standing up. He looked around, observing the dark alleys and the opaque windows of the surrounding buildings. "And find anyone who might have seen something. Someone must have seen something." As the officer walked away to follow orders, Jack was left alone with his thoughts and the incessant rain. He lit a cigarette, the small orange glow contrasting with the darkness around him. Something about this case disturbed him deeply. A young, well-dressed woman, left like a ghost in a dirty alley, with only a flower to tell her story. "Who are you?" he asked the lifeless body, blowing smoke into the cloudy sky. "And why would someone want to kill you without leaving a trace?" Jack's thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice. "Jack, what do you have here?" It was Rosie Carter, the city's medical examiner, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a dark sense of humor that rivaled his own. "Rosie," Jack nodded. "A nameless young woman and a jasmine flower. Can you figure out something?" Rosie knelt beside the body, adjusting her glasses. "Always the romantic detective, aren't you, Jack? Let's see what we can do. But I'll tell you one thing, this jasmine, it's odd." "Odd is an understatement," Jack agreed. "I have a feeling we're just scratching the surface." Rosie looked at him, her eyes serious. "Well, then we'd better start digging, hadn't we?" Jack nodded, extinguishing the cigarette on the sole of his shoe. He knew this investigation wouldn't be simple. There was a story behind that flower, and he was determined to uncover it. As the night wore on and the rain continued to fall, Jack Malone felt a familiar sense of excitement and dread. Once again, he was on the trail of a mystery, and this time he wouldn't stop until he found all the answers. The shadow of a smile crossed Jack's tired face as he followed Rosie away from the scene. This was his world. Mysteries, secrets, and above all, the relentless pursuit of truth. And he wouldn't have it any other way. Chapter 2. The Enigma of the Crime Scene. The sun began to peek over the horizon, tinting the sky a dull gray as the first rays of light struggled to penetrate the dense fog enveloping the city. Jack Malone was back in the alley, now empty and silent, except for the distant sound of morning traffic. The young woman's body had been removed, but the crime scene was still fresh in the detective's mind. He crouched down again at the exact spot where the body had been found. The jasmine flower was still in his hands, its sweet scent contrasting with the city's decay around him. Jack felt that this flower was the key to unraveling the mystery. But how? He lit another cigarette, an attempt to calm his nerves and clear his mind. "You're back early, Jack," said Rosie, who had just arrived at the alley. "Couldn't sleep, could you?" "You know how it is, Rosie," Jack replied, exhaling smoke. "Something doesn't add up here. A death with no signs of struggle, no visible wounds, and this flower. It's almost as if someone wanted to leave a message." Rosie smiled, a rare expression on her serious face. "Well, I did the autopsy and you were right. No signs of violence. The cause of death is a mystery. No injection marks, no detectable poison. It's as if she simply stopped living." "Stopped living," Jack repeated, thoughtful. "And this flower, what do you make of it?" "A jasmine," said Rosie, taking the flower from his hands and examining it. "A flower that symbolizes love, beauty, and sometimes purity. But here it seems out of place. It's a disturbing contrast with the filth of this alley." Jack agreed, his thoughts wandering. He knew he needed more information. "Rosie, I need you to do a more detailed examination. Maybe there's something we're not seeing. And I'll look deeper into this flower." "I'm on it," replied Rosie, heading back to the morgue. "And Jack, be careful. This case has a sinister air." Jack nodded, his eyes fixed on the alley. He began to scour the area, examining every detail meticulously. Then something caught his attention. A small mark on the ground, almost imperceptible, as if something had been dragged. Following the clue, he found a fragment of fabric caught on a nearby fence. "Interesting," Jack murmured, pocketing the fragment. He knew he needed to find more clues, anything that could shed light on the victims and the killer's identities. Back at the precinct, Jack delved into the missing persons records. It didn't take long to find a name that matched the description. Emily Clark, a 25-year-old woman who had been missing for a week. The photos showed a beautiful, smiling woman with her whole life ahead of her. But something in her eyes in those photos seemed uneasy. "Emily Clark," Jack said aloud. "What happened to you?" Determined to find out more, Jack drove to Emily's last known address. It was a modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood, a stark contrast to the alley where she was found. He knocked on the door, and a middle-aged woman with red eyes from crying answered. "Mrs. Clark?" Jack asked, showing his badge. "I'm Detective Jack Malone. May I speak with you about Emily?" The woman nodded, letting him in. The apartment was clean and organized, but a palpable sadness hung in the air. Photos of Emily were everywhere, showing a young woman full of life. "Emily was a good girl," Mrs. Clark said, her voice trembling. "She was cheerful, hardworking, never got into trouble. Did she have any enemies? Anyone who might want to harm her?" Jack asked, trying to be gentle. "No, no one," the woman replied, wiping away tears. "But she was different lately, quieter, more reserved. I knew something was wrong, but she didn't want to worry me." Jack thanked Mrs. Clark and left the apartment, his mind buzzing with questions. Emily was involved in something that troubled her, something that led her to a dark alley and, eventually, to death. As he drove back to the precinct, Jack couldn't stop thinking about the jasmine flower. A beautiful young woman, a mysterious death, and a flower symbolizing purity and love. It all formed a disturbing picture, a web of mystery he was determined to unravel. Upon arriving at the precinct, Jack found a message on his desk. It was from the forensic lab. "Jack, we have something interesting. Come quickly. Rosie." Jack knew he was on the right track. He grabbed his coat and hurried out, a new determination in his eyes. The case was far from solved, but he was getting closer to the truth. And nothing would stop him from finding out who killed Emily Clark and why. Chapter 3. The First Suspect. The sound of rain against the forensic lab windows filled the room with a constant, melancholic melody. Jack Malone hurried in, shaking the excess water from his coat as his eyes searched for Rosie. She was bent over a microscope, completely absorbed in her work. "Rosie," "What have you got for me?" Jack asked, approaching her. Rosie looked up, a spark of excitement in her eyes. "Jack, you're going to want to see this. We did a more detailed toxicology exam and found traces of a rare compound in her system. Something that could cause paralysis and eventually cardiac arrest, without leaving visible marks." "What kind of compound?" Jack asked, intrigued. "It's called tetrodotoxin. It's a potent neurotoxin found in some poisonous fish, like pufferfish. It's extremely rare and difficult to obtain," Rosie explained, handing him a detailed report. "Tetrodotoxin. Someone knew exactly what they were doing," Jack murmured, absorbing the information. "And the jasmine flower? No fingerprints, but there were traces of a fine powder on its petals. It appears to be a type of pollen. I'm still analyzing it, but it could be a clue," Rosie replied, turning back to the microscope. "Thanks, Rosie. This gives us something to go on," Jack said, leaving the lab with a renewed sense of urgency. Back at the precinct, Jack decided to follow the most obvious lead: Emily's ex-boyfriend. According to her roommate's statement, the relationship had ended tumultuously, with lots of shouting and threats. He needed answers. Jack located the address of Mark Reynolds, the ex-boyfriend, and drove to the quiet suburb where he lived. The house was simple, with a well-kept garden, but Jack wasn't fooled by the peaceful appearance. He knocked on the door, and a young man in his early 30s, with disheveled hair and red eyes, answered. "Mark Reynolds?" Jack asked, showing his badge. "I'm Detective Jack Malone. I need to talk to you about Emily Clark." Mark paled at the mention of Emily's name. "What happened to her? Is she okay?" "Emily was found dead, Mark," Jack said, watching the man's reaction closely. Mark staggered, holding onto the door for support. "No, it can't be. Emily, no. I need you to come down to the precinct for some questions," Jack said. "We need to understand what happened." Mark nodded, visibly shaken, and followed Jack to the car. At the precinct, he was taken to an interrogation room, where Jack sat across from him, studying him carefully. "Mark, I need you to be honest with me," Jack began. "What was your relationship with Emily? Can anyone confirm where you were last night?" We broke up about a month ago," Mark said, his voice trembling. "I loved her, but we fought a lot. She started to pull away. It seemed like she had secrets, but I would never hurt her, Detective. I was home last night, alone. Do you know if Emily was involved with anyone or anything that could put her in danger?" Jack asked, watching Mark's reactions. "She mentioned a new job, but she never told me what it was. She said it could change her life. She seemed worried but wouldn't let me help," Mark replied, rubbing his temples. "Please, Detective, I just want to know what happened." Jack sighed, feeling that Mark was being sincere. "Mark, I'm not here to accuse you. We just need all the information we can get to find who did this." As Mark was released, Jack pondered the new information. Emily was involved in something secret, something dangerous enough to lead to her death. He needed to find out what this new job was and who was behind it. Back in his office, Jack began to sift through Emily's phone records. A series of frequent calls to an unknown number caught his attention. He decided to trace the number, hoping it could lead to more answers. Night fell again over the city, but Jack did not rest. He knew time was of the essence. Each passing moment made the trail colder, and with such a meticulous killer on the loose, he needed to stay one step ahead. As the phone rang on the other line, Jack felt a surge of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he was getting closer to uncovering the truth. The detective took a deep breath as a voice answered on the other end. "Hello?" said a cautious male voice. "Good evening. This is Detective Jack Malone. I need to speak with you about Emily Clark," Jack said firmly. The line went silent for a moment before the voice responded. "Meet me at Café Noir in an hour. Come alone." Jack hung up the phone, his heart beating faster. He knew he was stepping into dangerous territory, but he had no choice. Emily Clark deserved justice, and he was determined to find the person responsible. Grabbing his hat and coat, Jack stepped out into the rainy night, heading towards Café Noir. where he hoped to find another piece of the puzzle surrounding Emily's death. Chapter 4. Secrets Revealed. The rain continued to fall incessantly as Jack Malone walked toward Café Noir. The dim streetlights cast a yellowish glow, reflected in the puddles covering the sidewalk. Café Noir was a discreet establishment with large windows and velvet curtains that blocked the view of the interior. A neon sign flickered, casting dancing shadows over Jack's tired face. He entered the café, shaking the water from his hat and coat. The atmosphere was cozy, with dark wooden tables and soft lighting. There were few people, each absorbed in their own thoughts, whispered conversations and cigarette smoke. Jack approached the counter and ordered a strong coffee, glancing around for the man who had spoken on the phone. "Detective Malone?" A soft voice caught his attention. Jack turned to find a middle-aged man, dressed in an expensive suit with a worried expression. "I'm Richard Hale. Thank you for coming." "Mr. Hale," Jack greeted, shaking the man's hand. "Did you know Emily Clark?" Richard nodded, pointing to a table in the farthest corner of the cafe. "Let's talk in a more private place." They sat down, and Richard began to speak, tension evident in every word. "I met Emily through an exclusive club, a place where high society members met for business and other interests." Jack frowned. "What kind of interests?" Richard hesitated before answering. Emily was a high-end escort. She had powerful clients, men willing to pay a fortune for her company. But she wasn't just a call girl. Emily was intelligent, shrewd. She used these connections to gather information, secrets she could use as leverage. "Was she blackmailing someone?" Jack asked, feeling he was getting closer to the truth. "Yes," Richard admitted, his voice trembling. "She had something on a very influential man, someone who wouldn't hesitate to silence any threat to his power." "Who?" Jack insisted. "I don't know for sure," said Richard, averting his gaze. Emily never revealed his name, but she said she was about to make a big revelation. She seemed scared but determined. Jack took a deep breath, processing the new information. "How do you fit into this, Hale? Why did you call me?" "Because I'm afraid," Richard replied. "I cared about Emily. She told me to find you if anything happened. She said you were the only one she could trust." Jack nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility increase. "We need to move fast, Hale. This man Emily was blackmailing might already know we're closing in." Richard agreed, handing Jack a small envelope. "This is all I have. Emily's notes, coded messages. Maybe you can decipher them." Jack took the envelope, feeling the rough texture of the paper between his fingers. "Thank you, Hale. I'll do what I can to uncover the truth." They parted ways, and Jack left Café Noir with his mind racing. The envelope weighed heavily in his pocket, a promise of answers but also more questions. He knew he was dealing with powerful people and that any misstep could be fatal. Back at his office, Jack opened the envelope. Inside, he found several sheets of paper, each covered in notes and enigmatic symbols. It was evident that Emily had encoded her information to protect it. Jack knew deciphering it wouldn't be easy, but it was his best chance. He spent hours analyzing the notes, trying to find a pattern. Finally, something clicked. Emily had used an old but effective encoding method. With patience and determination, Jack began to decode the messages. Names, dates, places. Everything started to make sense. One message stood out. "Meeting at the Botanical Garden at midnight. The truth will be revealed." The date matched the night Emily was found dead. Jack felt a chill. She was about to expose everything, and that led to her death. Determined to follow this new lead, Jack prepared to visit the Botanical Garden. He knew he was getting close to the core of the mystery, but he also knew that danger was lurking. As night fell and the city sank into an uneasy silence, Jack Malone headed to the Botanical Garden, with a heavy heart and a sharp mind. He was determined to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The Botanical Garden was a place of serene beauty during the day, but at night, under the faint moonlight, it took on an almost ethereal quality. Jack walked among the exotic plants, the soft sounds of nature blending with his careful footsteps. He felt as if he was being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide a secret. Finally, he reached a clearing where Emily had scheduled the meeting. He looked around, searching for any sign, any clue that might have been left behind. Then he saw it. A small metal box, partially hidden among the roots of an old tree. Jack opened the box carefully, finding inside a flash drive and a note. The note was handwritten, with Emily's delicate penmanship. For Jack Malone. The truth is inside. Trust Richard. With the flash drive in hand, Jack knew he was closer to the truth than ever. He returned to the precinct, eager to discover what Emily had left for him. Back in his office, Jack inserted the flash drive into the computer. Videos, documents, and audio recordings began to appear on the screen. Emily had gathered incriminating evidence against some of the city's most powerful men. Well-known names, public figures, all involved in a network of corruption and crime. Jack felt a mixture of triumph and terror. He had the proof he needed, but he knew this put him directly in the crosshairs of those who killed Emily. He was playing a dangerous game, and the next move would be crucial. As the first rays of sun began to light the city, Jack leaned back in his chair, exhausted but determined. He knew the battle was just beginning, but he was ready. He would bring justice for Emily Clark, no matter the cost. Chapter 5. A New Lead. Dawn brought a new day to the city, but for Jack Malone, the night never seemed to end. After spending the early hours reviewing the files on the flash drive, he knew he was about to uncover a hornet's nest. Emily Clark had managed to gather damning evidence against some of the city's most influential men, and now, the responsibility to expose these secrets fell upon him. Jack knew he needed more than just evidence. He needed a strategy, allies he could trust. But first, he had to follow the lead left by Emily. There was one person who might have more answers, Richard Hale. Jack arrived at Hale's office, an elegant building in the city center. He went up to the top floor, where he was greeted by an efficient secretary who led him to Hale's office. Richard was waiting, nervous but visibly relieved to see Jack. "Detective Malone, did you find anything?" Richard asked, his voice laden with tension. "Emily left more than we expected," Jack said, showing him the flash drive. "Enough evidence to bring down half the city. But we need more. We need to understand who's behind this and how to expose everything without getting ourselves killed." Richard nodded, running a trembling hand through his hair. "What do you need from me?" Emily mentioned a meeting at the Botanical Garden. She left a box with this flash drive and a note saying to trust you. "Why would she trust you, Hale? What's your role in all this?" Jack asked, his eyes fixed on Richard. "Emily and I met through the club. I helped her get into that world, make connections. But I started to worry when she got too involved. She trusted me because I always tried to protect her. When she told me she had evidence against these people, I knew she was in danger. That's why I told her to find you," Richard explained, his gaze sincere. "Do you know who's behind this? Who was Emily blackmailing?" Jack pressed. Richard hesitated before answering. "There are rumors. One name that keeps coming up, Victor Lang. He's a media magnate, one of the most powerful men in the city. He has deep connections to the underworld. If anyone had a motive to silence Emily, it would be him." Jack made a mental note of the name. "We need more than rumors. I need something concrete to link Lang to these crimes." "I know someone who can help," Richard said reluctantly. "An informant who works for Lang. He's scared but might talk if he's protected." "Set up a meeting," Jack said, standing up, "and do it fast. We don't have much time." Jack left Hale's office with a new objective. As he walked through the bustling streets, his phone rang. It was Rosie. "Jack, you need to come to the morgue. I found something you need to see," she said, urgency clear in her voice. Jack hurried to the morgue, where Rosie was waiting with a grave expression. She led him to the room where Emily's body lay. "Look at this," Rosie said, pointing to a small mark at the base of Emily's neck, almost imperceptible. "It's a needle prick, almost impossible to see, but it's there. And this confirms our suspicion about the tetrodotoxin." "So she was deliberately murdered," Jack said, feeling anger rise within him. Someone drugged her and left her to die. Exactly, Rosie replied. And there's more. I found traces of the same pollen that was on the jasmine flower. It's rare, originating from a specific species that only grows in a particular greenhouse outside the city. A greenhouse? Jack asked, intrigued. Whose? It belongs to an exotic plant collector. Someone with powerful connections, Rosie said, handing him an address. Jack took the paper, feeling he was getting closer to the truth. Thanks, Rosie. This could be the missing piece. Leaving the morgue, Jack knew he was dealing with something much bigger than he had imagined. Each clue led him to a new level of complexity and danger. He needed to act quickly and carefully. The greenhouse was his next destination. Arriving at the address Rosie provided, Jack found a mansion surrounded by high walls and armed guards. He knew he couldn't force his way in, so he decided to observe from a distance. He noticed a delivery truck leaving the gates and decided to follow it, hoping it would lead to useful information. The truck stopped at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Jack waited until the men unloaded the boxes and left. Carefully, he approached the warehouse, his detective instincts sharp. Inside, he found a storage room full of boxes marked with strange symbols. He opened one and found vials of a clear liquid, tetrodotoxin. Damn, Jack muttered. This is bigger than I thought. Before he could leave, he heard voices and approaching footsteps. Quickly, he hid behind some boxes, watching as two men entered the warehouse. They spoke in low voices, mentioning Victor Lang and the need to move the products quickly. Jack knew he needed to act fast. He took some photos with his phone, ensuring he had evidence if needed. Once the men left, he slipped out of the warehouse and returned to his car. He knew he had valuable information, but he also knew he was being watched. As he drove back to the city, his phone rang again. It was Richard. Jack, the meeting is set. Tonight, at the old warehouse near the docks. The informant will be there. Be careful. I'll be there, Jack replied, hanging up. He knew the night promised to be dangerous, but he was determined to go through with it. Emily Clark deserved justice, and he was willing to face any danger to get it. As dusk approached and the city once again plunged into shadows, Jack prepared for the confrontation to come. He was getting closer to unraveling the web of corruption and power that had led to Emily's death. And nothing would stop him until the truth was revealed. Chapter 6. The Trap. The abandoned warehouse near the docks was a place forgotten by time, its brick walls crumbling and windows shattered. Night had fallen, enveloping the area in almost palpable darkness, broken only by the faint light of distant street lamps. Jack Malone parked his car in a discreet shadow, carefully observing the surroundings. He felt the weight of each step as he approached the warehouse. The wooden floorboards creaked under his feet, the sound echoing through the empty space. Jack was on high alert, aware that any wrong move could cost him his life. Across the warehouse, a hooded figure emerged from the darkness. The informant, presumably. Jack took a step forward but kept his hand close to his holster, ready for anything. Are you the informant? Jack asked, his voice firm but low. The figure nodded, pulling back the hood to reveal a young, nervous-looking man. Yes, my name is Tony. Richard said you were looking for answers. Yes, and it seems you have some, Jack said, trying to reassure the man. What can you tell me about Victor Lang and his involvement in Emily Clark's death? Tony looked around, clearly scared. Lang is dangerous. He has the power and money to do whatever he wants. Emily found out something big about his illegal operations, something that could destroy him. She started blackmailing him, and he had no choice but to silence her. What kind of illegal operations? Jack pressed. Drugs, weapons, human trafficking. Everything goes through his hands. And he has people everywhere. Police, government, media. That's why he's untouchable, Tony explained, his voice trembling. Jack made a mental note of the information. We need concrete proof. Do you have anything we can use against him? I have some documents, transaction records. They're hidden in a safe place, Tony said. But we need to be quick. Lang found out I'm talking to you. He might already be coming after me. Jack nodded, aware of the imminent danger. Let's get those documents and get out of here. Where are they hidden? Before Tony could answer, the screeching sound of tires echoed through the warehouse. Jack drew his gun, instinctively positioning himself between Tony and the source of the noise. The warehouse was soon invaded by a dozen armed men, all with cold, determined looks. "Malone, you've messed with the wrong people." A firm voice sounded from the back of the warehouse. Victor Lang emerged from the shadows, his face marked by restrained anger. "I thought I could let this go, but you're digging too deep." Jack raised his gun, but he knew he was outnumbered. "Lang, you killed Emily Clark, and you won't get away with it." Lang laughed, a dry, cruel sound. "You think anyone cares about another dead girl in this city? I control everything, Malone. And you? You're just an obsolete detective. Let's see how long your empire lasts," Jack retorted, trying to buy time. Suddenly, a series of gunshots echoed through the warehouse. Jack and Tony dove behind a pile of crates for cover. The gunfight was intense, with bullets ricocheting off the walls and creating a cacophony of destruction. Jack returned fire, taking down 2 of Lang's men, but he knew they were outnumbered. "Tony, the documents. Where are they?" Jack shouted, trying to make himself heard over the noise. "In my backpack. Over there." Tony pointed to a bag leaning against a distant wall. Jack knew he had to get to that backpack. With a quick signal, he instructed Tony to run while he provided cover. The two moved in sync, with Jack firing to keep Lang's men at bay. Tony grabbed the backpack, and they retreated to a side exit of the warehouse. The cold night air enveloped them as they finally exited the warehouse, panting but alive. Jack knew they had little time before Lang and his men found them again. They ran to Jack's car, and Tony quickly opened the backpack, revealing a set of documents and a laptop. "This should be enough to bring him down," Tony said, handing everything to Jack. Jack quickly scanned the documents. They were detailed records of illegal transactions, with Lang's name clearly involved. "We need to get this to the media and the right authorities. This can take him down." Tony nodded, still trembling. "But what if he comes after us?" "Then we'll be ready," Jack replied, determined. "But first, we need to ensure these proofs are made public." Jack started the car and sped off, heading to a safe location where he could analyze the documents and plan the next steps. He knew the battle was just beginning, but with this evidence, he had a real chance of taking down Victor Lang and getting justice for Emily Clark. As the night deepened and the city seemed darker than ever, Jack Malone prepared for the final confrontation. He was closer to the truth, and nothing would stop him from exposing the dark secrets that had led to Emily's death. Justice was within reach, and he was ready to face any challenge that came his way. Chapter 7. The Web of Lies. Jack Malone sat in his office, the dim light from the lamp casting long shadows on the walls filled with newspaper clippings, photos, and maps connected by red threads. At the center of this web of information was a photo of Victor Lang, smiling arrogantly. Jack knew that taking down Lang would be complicated. The man had an impenetrable network of protection. Tony sat on the other side of the desk, still visibly shaken. He held a cup of coffee, trying to calm his nerves. Jack looked at him with a mix of compassion and urgency. They needed to act quickly and precisely. "Tony, these documents are valuable, but we need more," Jack said, flipping through the detailed records of illegal transactions. "Lang has friends in high places. We need proof that directly connects him to the crimes." Tony nodded, his voice low. "I know where we can find more. There's a warehouse where Lang keeps important records. But it's risky, heavily guarded." Jack smiled, a hard and determined smile. "Risk is our business. We'll need a plan." As they strategized, Jack received a call. It was Rosie with important news. "Jack, I found something interesting. The pollen on the jasmine isn't common. It's from a species cultivated only in a specific greenhouse, a property linked to Victor Lang." "Great work, Rosie," Jack responded, feeling a surge of adrenaline. "This could give us the direct connection we need." "Be careful, Jack. Lang isn't the type to leave loose ends," Rosie warned. "I know," Jack said, hanging up, He looked at Tony, determined. Let's take this bastard down. That night, Jack and Tony headed to the indicated warehouse. The place was heavily guarded, but Jack had a plan. They waited until the shift change left the security more relaxed and used the darkness to their advantage. With his experience, Jack moved silently, neutralizing guards one by one while Tony followed, carrying a backpack full of equipment. When they finally reached the central office, Jack began searching through physical files while Tony hacked into the security system. "Jack here," Tony called in an urgent whisper, pointing to a set of folders marked with Lang's name. Jack quickly flipped through the folders, his eyes widening at the names and dates. Here it is. Financial transactions, secret agreements, and photos. Photos of Emily with Lang. He took pictures of the documents with his phone and stored them in the backpack. He knew time was of the essence. The alarm could go off at any moment, alerting Lang's men. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor. "We're compromised," Jack muttered. "We need to get out now." With almost superhuman skill, Jack and Tony escaped through the shadows, avoiding the guards who were starting to mobilize. As they left the warehouse, Jack felt a mix of triumph and relief. He had the evidence he needed, but he knew the final confrontation was looming. Back at the office, Jack and Tony reviewed the evidence. The photos of Emily and Lang together, the financial transactions, and the records of illegal agreements were enough to expose Lang and his allies. They needed to get this to the media and trustworthy authorities. "We need someone who can ensure this gets to the public," Jack said, thinking of his few reliable connections. "I know a journalist. He's fearless and has the right contacts." The next morning, Jack contacted Mike Anderson, an investigative journalist known for his courage and integrity. They arranged to meet at a discreet cafe in the city center. Mike arrived punctually, a middle-aged man with an air of unshakable determination. "Jack, I hear you've got something big." "You have no idea," Jack replied, handing over the documents and photos. "This could bring down Victor Lang. But we need to ensure it's published before he has a chance to silence all of us." Mike looked through the documents, his eyes widening as he grasped the magnitude of the evidence. "This is huge. I'll start working on it immediately. But you know Lang will react. We need to be prepared." "I'm counting on it," Jack said with a grim smile. "He'll make a mistake, and when he does, we'll be ready." As Mike prepared to publish the story, Jack and Tony reinforced their precautions. They knew Lang wouldn't stand still. The final battle was approaching, and Jack was determined to see justice done. The city, with its shadows and secrets, was becoming increasingly the battleground where Jack Malone would fight his final showdown against Victor Lang's corrupt power. And as the days turned into endless nights, Jack knew he was closer than ever to exposing the truth and honoring Emily Clark's memory. Chapter 8. The Revelation. The city was in a state of unrest as morning dawned, bringing with it a sense of urgency and tension. The cafe where Jack Malone had met with Mike Anderson was now empty, but the air still carried the weight of the revelations made there. Jack knew that publishing the evidence would mark the beginning of the end for Victor Lang, but he also knew he was about to face a desperate and dangerous enemy. Back at the precinct, Jack prepared for the inevitable confrontation. His office was a chaotic yet organized mess, with papers, photos, and evidence scattered everywhere. He checked every detail, making sure he hadn't left any loose ends. The door opened, and Rosie walked in, a serious expression on her face. "Jack, are you sure you're ready for this?" she asked, her eyes filled with concern. "We have no choice, Rosie. Lang is a cancer we need to remove from this city," Jack replied, not taking his eyes off the documents in front of him. Rosie sighed, nodding. "Then I'm with you. Let's do this together." Jack smiled, grateful for her support. "Thank you, Rosie. We'll need all the help we can get." Meanwhile, Mike Anderson was in his office, reviewing the documents one last time before sending the story for publication. He knew that once the article went live, there would be no turning back. Lang would retaliate and everyone would be in danger. But Mike was a man of principles, and the truth was more important than any personal risk. "Let's do this," Mike murmured, clicking send. The story was now in the hands of the media, ready to be released to the public. Jack, Rosie, and Tony gathered in a safe location to discuss their next steps. They knew Lang would react quickly, and they needed to be ready for anything. "Where's the informant, Tony?" Jack asked. "He's hidden in a safe place. But he won't be safe for long if Lang finds out where he is," Tony replied, nervous. "We need to protect Tony and the informant," Rosie said firmly. "And we need to make sure Lang doesn't have a chance to escape." That night, the news broke. Mike Anderson's report exposed Victor Lang's criminal activities, his connections to the underworld, and his involvement in Emily Clark's death. The city was in shock, and the police were forced to act. Lang, in his luxurious mansion, watched the report with a look of contained fury. He knew he had to act quickly to protect his empire. He picked up the phone and started making calls, trying to contain the damage. But Jack was one step ahead. He and his team had planned an operation to capture Lang and dismantle his network. With the help of Rosie and Tony, Jack set up a raid to arrest Lang and his key allies. "It's time," Jack said, looking at Rosie and Tony. "Let's end this." As night fell, Jack and his team approached Lang's mansion. They were prepared for anything, knowing Lang wouldn't surrender easily. Using the information Tony had provided, they disabled the security cameras and entered the property discreetly. Inside the mansion, Lang was meeting with his henchmen, trying to formulate an escape plan. But the door was forcefully kicked open, and Jack entered, gun drawn. "Victor Lang, you're under arrest," Jack declared, his voice firm and authoritative. Lang stood up slowly, a cold smile on his lips. "You think you can stop me, Malone? I control this city." "Not anymore," Jack replied. "It's over for you." Lang's henchmen tried to react, but they were quickly overpowered by Jack's team. Lang attempted to flee but was intercepted by Rosie, who skillfully handcuffed him. "You'll pay for your crimes," she said, looking directly into Lang's eyes. As Lang was led out of the mansion, the media was already gathered, capturing every moment. The city would finally see justice being served. Jack felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He knew there was still much to be done, but this was a crucial victory. Back at the precinct, Jack, Rosie, and Tony celebrated quietly. They knew they had achieved something significant, but they also knew there were many battles ahead. "We did it," Jack said, raising a glass in an impromptu toast. "Justice for Emily." Rosie and Tony smiled, raising their glasses as well. "For Emily," they repeated in unison. The city was changing, and Jack Malone knew he and his team were part of that change. They had exposed the web of lies Victor Lang had woven, and now the city had a chance to rebuild. As night turned into day and the city began to catch its breath, Jack looked out at the horizon, determined to continue fighting for truth and justice. He knew there was still much to be done, but with allies like Rosie and Tony by his side, he was ready to face any challenge. The web of lies had been unraveled, and Jack Malone was ready to face the future with the same determination and courage he always had. The battle was far from over, but he knew he was on the right path, and that was all he needed to keep going. Chapter 9. The Final Confrontation. The arrest of Victor Lang had shaken the city, but Jack Malone knew the victory was far from complete. Lang's influence extended throughout the city, and many of his allies were still at large. Lang had been only the tip of the iceberg, and Jack was determined to dismantle the entire criminal network. As he reviewed the documents and testimonies obtained, Jack realized that many of Lang's operations were linked to an even more shadowy figure, Gregory Gray Hunt, a magnate who operated from the shadows, invisible to the law. Hunt was the real mastermind behind Lang's empire. "We need to go after Hunt," Jack told Rosie and Tony during a meeting in his office. "He's the next target." "But how? He's much more protected than Lang." "It will be hard to get to him," Tony argued, worried. "We need a different approach," Rosie said, thoughtful. "What if we use the media again? Put public pressure on him." "That's a good idea," Jack agreed. "But first, we need more concrete evidence." Let's take a closer look at Lang's documents and see what we can find. Jack, Rosie, and Tony spent hours combing through the documents. Finally, they found something. A series of transactions linking Hunt to various illegal activities, including drug trafficking and money laundering. But there was more, mentions of a secret facility where Hunt kept his darkest secrets. "This is exactly what we need," Jack said, his eyes shining with determination. "Let's take him down." They devised a detailed plan to infiltrate the secret facility. They knew it would be risky, but they also knew it was the only way to expose Hunt and dismantle his empire. That night, Jack, Rosie, and Tony headed to the location indicated in the documents. It was an old warehouse, seemingly abandoned, but Jack knew appearances could be deceiving. They entered stealthily, avoiding security cameras and disabling alarms. Inside the warehouse, the atmosphere was oppressive, with the air heavy with humidity and the smell of mold. Moving silently through the dimly lit corridors, Jack and his team found a heavy metal door, locked with an advanced security system. "Leave it to me," Tony said, pulling out his toolkit and starting to work on the security panel. As Tony worked, Jack and Rosie stood guard, alert for any signs of danger. After a few tense minutes, Tony managed to unlock the door. "We're in," he whispered, pushing the door open. The room inside was a treasure trove of evidence. Computers, documents, and recordings linking Hunt to a vast network of crimes. Jack and Rosie began collecting everything they could, while Tony hacked the computers to copy the files. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor. Jack knew time was running out. "We need to hurry," he said, picking up the pace. The footsteps grew louder. Jack, Rosie, and Tony were almost finished when the door burst open, revealing a dozen armed men. "Stay where you are," shouted the leader of the henchmen, pointing his gun at them. Jack raised his hands slowly, trying to stay calm. "We're just taking what we need. We don't want any trouble." "You chose the wrong place to break into, Malone," said the leader with a cruel smile. "Hunt sends his regards." Before Jack could respond, a shot rang out. Rosie, quick as lightning, had fired her gun, taking down the leader. Chaos erupted, with bullets ricocheting off the metal walls as Jack, Rosie, and Tony fought for their lives. Using the confusion to their advantage, Jack managed to take down a few more of Hunt's men while Rosie covered Tony, who was nearly finished copying the files. "Come on, Tony. We need to get out of here," she shouted. "Done," Tony said, disconnecting the hacking device. "Let's go." They ran down the corridor, firing at the henchmen pursuing them. Adrenaline pumped through their veins as they made their way to the exit. They reached the door and burst into the open air, the night enveloping them in darkness. "Quick, get in," Jack shouted, helping Tony into the car while Rosie covered their retreat. They sped away from the warehouse, hearts pounding. They knew they had something big, but they also knew Hunt wouldn't give up easily. Back at Jack's office, they began reviewing the evidence collected. "This is more than enough to take down Hunt," Rosie said, looking at the documents. "We need to make sure this gets out properly," Jack said. "We'll use the media just like we did with Lang. But this time, we need to be even more careful." They contacted Mike Anderson again, who was shocked at the magnitude of the new evidence. "This is huge, Jack. Let's expose it all." In the following days, the story exploded in the media. The city was in an uproar as details of Gregory Hunt's crimes were revealed. Authorities were forced to act, and Hunt was arrested, along with many of his allies. Jack, Rosie, and Tony felt a sense of relief and accomplishment. They knew they had achieved something significant, something that would make a difference in the city. But they also knew the fight against corruption and crime was never ending. As they watched the news of Hunt's arrest on television, Jack raised his glass again. "For Emily," he said with a satisfied smile. "For Emily," Rosie and Tony echoed. The battle against Victor Lang and Gregory Hunt had come to an end, but Jack Malone knew many more battles lay ahead, and he was ready to face them with Rosie and Tony by his side. The city still had many dark secrets, but with people like Jack, there was hope that the truth would always prevail. As night turned into day and the city began to breathe again, Jack looked toward the horizon, determined to continue fighting for truth and justice. He knew there was still much to do, but with allies like Rosie and Tony, he was ready for any challenge. The web of lies had been unraveled, and Jack Malone was prepared to face the future with the same determination and courage he always had. The battle was far from over, but he knew he was on the right path, and that was all he needed to keep going. Chapter 10. Justice and Redemption. The city was in a state of transformation after the downfall of Victor Lang and Gregory Hunt. The morning sun illuminated the streets, bringing a renewed sense of hope and justice. However, for Jack Malone, Rosie, and Tony, the fight was far from over. They knew there was still much work to be done to ensure the truth prevailed. Jack woke up early that morning, the fatigue evident in his eyes but with an unshakable determination. He knew the battle against corruption and crime was a continuous journey. As he looked out the window of his office, he saw the city waking up to a new day. It was a fresh start, but also a reminder that justice needed constant vigilance. Rosie arrived at the office with a tired but satisfied smile. "Jack, did you see the news? The city is starting to believe that things can change." "Yes, Rosie. It's a start, but we can't let our guard down. Hunt and Lang may be out of the picture, but their allies are still out there. We need to keep up the pressure," Jack said, looking at the pile of documents on his desk. Tony walked in soon after, holding a cup of coffee and looking weary. "Jack, we have more leads on some of Hunt's associates. It looks like they're trying to reorganize the operations." "Then let's take them down before they can regroup," Jack responded, grabbing his coat. "We need to maintain the pressure." As they prepared to leave, Jack's phone rang. It was Mike Anderson. "Jack, do you have a minute? I have something you need to see." "Sure, Mike. We're on our way," Jack said, hanging up the phone. He looked at Rosie and Tony. "Looks like we have a new lead." Arriving at Mike's office, they were greeted with a series of documents and photos spread out on the table. "Jack, we received an anonymous tip. It seems someone from the inside is willing to talk." Jack examined the documents. "Who is this person?" "One of Hunt's former henchmen. He's willing to make a deal in exchange for protection," Mike explained. "This could be exactly what we need to take down the last remnants of Hunt's empire," Jack said, his eyes shining with determination. The meeting was set for that night at a secure location. Jack, Rosie, and Tony prepared for the encounter, aware of the risks involved. Upon arriving at the location, they found a middle-aged man, nervous but determined. "My name is Carlos. I worked for Hunt for many years, but I can't keep living with these secrets," he said, his voice trembling. "I can give you everything you need, but I need protection. We'll ensure your safety, Carlos. But we need all the information you have," Jack replied firmly. Carlos began to talk, revealing dark details of Hunt's operations, the names of collaborators, and money laundering schemes. Jack and his team listened intently, recording every word. "This is gold, Jack. With this information, we can completely dismantle Hunt's network," Rosie said as Carlos continued to speak. As the night wore on, the magnitude of Carlos's revelations became evident. They knew they were about to deliver the final blow to the criminal network that had dominated the city for so long. The next morning, Jack, Rosie, and Tony presented the new evidence to the authorities. With media pressure and Carlos's collaboration, arrests were made swiftly. The city was finally starting to free itself from the grip of fear and corruption. That night, Jack and his team gathered at a local bar to celebrate. The atmosphere was filled with laughter and music, a welcome contrast to the tension of the past days. "We did it, Jack," Rosie said, raising her glass. "We dismantled Hunt and Lang's network. The city is finally safe." "For now," Jack replied with a tired but satisfied smile. "There's still a lot to be done, but we've made a huge step." Tony nodded. "For Emily, and for all the victims who deserve justice." "For Emily," Jack and Rosie echoed, toasting. The city was changing, and Jack knew he and his team were part of that change. They had faced powerful enemies and won, but they knew the true victory lay in continuing to protect justice and truth. As the night wore on, Jack looked around, seeing happy and hopeful faces. He knew that with allies like Rosie and Tony, they were ready for any challenge that came their way. The battle for justice would never end, but they were prepared to face it, one day at a time. And so, with a renewed sense of purpose and determination, Jack Malone and his team prepared for the future, knowing that as long as they continued to fight for the truth, the city would always have a chance.